Scanning for audio.
This version of the podcast is mixed in mono, but if you would like to listen in 5.1 surround sound, please visit ufocast.co.uk/prisoner for more details.
This is episode 8, but we recorded it 13th back in September 2022.
Hello and welcome to episode 8 of By Hook or By Crook, our Prisoner podcast. I am Luke, and my co-host as ever is...
Me, Michael, host of the Tin Dog podcast, but you just know me as Michael, or whatever. I don't care. It's me. But we've got a number 3.
We have got a number 3, and we are, inside baseball, we are reconvening after quite a long recording break. Aren't we, Michael? We haven't recorded since before the summer. It is now September 2022, and hopefully you're listening to this in 2023. Our guest this evening is Robert Fairclough, which, if you are in any way involved in Prisoner fandom, you should know his name because he's extensively written on The Prisoner. And we are lucky to have him to join us this week to talk about Dance of the Dead. But as ever, we're going to dive in and ask, why are you a Prisoner fan? When did you first encounter the show, and what grabbed you about it?
It's one of those. There seemed to be an article in either Starburst or Starlog about The Prisoner, and it had these wonderfully intriguing photographs, which seemed very bizarre, like a huge kind of inflatable balloons, and that bloke who used to be in Danger Man, which didn't sort of make a great deal of sense. So I was late one night. I think it was '82. There was a thing called Best of British on ITV. It was one of those fill-in seasons they had when they had the Olympics on, and they showed the girl who was death. And from the title sequence, I was completely blown away and hooked. And I'd never seen anything like this on television. I mean, that title sequence is a masterpiece. It's still a masterpiece of editing and music and composition and camera angles. It was like, this wasn't a TV show. This was filmmaking on television. And, I think we can see how far things have progressed because most TV now looks like a film. So there was a prisoner in the 1960s doing it before anyone else had really done it. Of course, didn't know that at the time. I was just blown away by the kind of sort of chutzpah of the title sequence. But the actual episode itself, I just thought, this is brilliant. I mean, it's full of jokes. It was really funny. Yet there was wonderfully surreal bits, like when he spins the back projection around, and you think, well, this is great. This is so self-aware. It's it's like I don't know, Casino Royale for the small screen, the '67 Casino Royale. Just like punching holes in the fourth wall, all this kind of thing. I'd never seen anything like it.
It's interesting that The Girl Who Was Death was your first episode, though, because it's somewhat atypical of the show as a whole.
I'm pretty sure it was mine too.
Really? You what, sorry?
I'm pretty sure it was my first episode as well.
I think it's the one they show if it's a one-off season because it's the one least likely to confuse people.
No, fair enough.
Because you think you're watching the Avengers or something.
Yeah.
But I just thought. But what was tantalising about it was the bit when they get to the end and they reveal that Dr. Schnips is number 2, or the Dr. Schnips and Sonia actors are the same as number 2 and his assistant, and you only get that brief bit of the village. And I was absolutely, again, I thought, God, I've got to see the rest of this, So that was what really got the hooks in it. And I was, eventually, I think, the Channel 4 first screening, that was when I saw it all for the first time.
And so what was it about watching that show as a whole then, when you finally saw everything, that made you a fan, and why do you keep coming back to the show, and why have you written about it as you have?
Well, it's beautiful. Well, as I said, it's beautifully made, and that extends to all the show, not just the title sequence. So obviously, sort of some of it looks a bit dated now. I mean, in some of the episodes, you can see that they're village mock-ups that were built in the studio. But the stuff done on location, I mean, and particularly in the episode we're going to discuss, Dance of the Dead, the quality of the cinematography is astonishing in some scenes. It's as good as any feature film. And so the Portmeirion location gives it such an individual style and feel that hasn't dated, because it doesn't look like any particular time period or anywhere. But apart from that, the stories are just brilliant. But what I do think that swung it completely for me is the fact that The Prisoner was made when the so-called swinging 60s were just becoming cynical. So you have all that, you have the brightness, you have the pop, the colour and the sparkle, but you also have this sinister undercurrent of people being manipulated, people being reduced to numbers, people being brainwashed, So it's right in the middle of the 60s before, things like the Paris riots, things before Vietnam really got heavy, and people started seeing that on television. But it's just beautifully made, and it tells you. I mean, particularly if you're a young man, as I was a lot of years ago, it's also the kind of thread that binds it all together is identity. It's about identity. It's about number 6 hanging on to his identity. Sometimes it's taken away and he becomes someone else, like Mr. X in The Girl Who Was Death, or the Colonel in Do Not Forsake Me. So it's about hanging on to your identity against the system, really. And that's a very 60s thing as well, but that's actually a very universal thing as well, I think.
And this is a question, you've sort of touched on it there. This is a question we often ask our guests. There are many ways to interpret The Prisoner. I mean, you can watch it and you can try and interpret it literally as a spy thriller. It works on that level. But there's a whole bunch of subtext. And depending on what you bring to the show, I think depends on what you take away. So what does The Prisoner mean? How do you interpret the ultimate meaning of the show? I mean, you just talked about it there being to do with identity, but is there anything else political or philosophical that you take away from the show?
I suppose in its simplest form is be yourself, isn't it? I suppose. That's a very good question. I've thought about that before. Just J. Michael Straczynski wrote an introduction to one of the Prisoner novels, that have been done fairly recently, and he said, if I could just sort of quote him, he said, "The prisoner is that bloke standing in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square, refusing to back down." I suppose that's what it's about, And interestingly, as again someone who's interested in music and popular music, I think that's why it strikes a chord with it struck a lot of chord with the punk generation, and the sort of new wave generation, because they were all against the system and so on. And
I mean, you talked about John Michael. What is it? JM. What's the J stand? What's the J stand for?
J. Michael Straczynski.
Yeah, no, but what does the J actually stand for? It's just the J, isn't it?
It's a mystery.
I mean, obviously, The Prisoner inspired Babylon 5 to some extent.
Yes, he apparently he offered that. What was the guy that Walter Koenig played, the kind of
Mr. Bester?
Yeah, he wanted McGowan to play that role. But
I mean, he would have been. I mean, Walter Koenig plays it brilliantly, but it would have been brilliant.
Can you imagine? Yes. Well, there you go. Yes, indeed.
With McGowan in it.
I'm looking to see what the J stands for using old-fashioned book technology.
Yes, I mean, as we record this, he is desperately trying to get a new Babylon 5 off the ground with the help of Twitter.
I heard about that. So
we'll see how it goes.
That's ongoing, is it? That's ongoing, is it? Oh, okay.
No, he said there was a decision made a couple of days ago, and he'll get back to us. So, God knows.
Yes,
because there was that episode, a very bizarre episode where. Is it Delan's being interrogated by this bloke who's dressed in a Victorian outfit? That's very prisoner, isn't it?
Yeah,
and
that's
turns out to be Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well,
Yes.
which brings us to this episode as well, the Jack the Ripper thing.
well, indeed, yes, yes.
Hang on. Yes. The guy who was originally cast as number 2 was going to wear a Jack the Ripper costume, right?
Yeah.
Is that right? And then because it was Mary Morris, it was Peter Pan instead.
It was going to, it was definitely going to be a bloke. It's a bloke in the script, and it was going to be dressed. He was going to be dressed as Jack the Ripper. Yeah.
Yeah. So, right, I'm gonna before we throw it over to Michael and then Rob for your thoughts. I'm gonna give you some background on this episode. So, I watched The Prisoner through the VHS tapes, and it was whatever order we got the VHS tapes in, and it was my brother that was collecting them, and I happened to be out when the rest of my family watched Dance of the Dead, and I came home and they were like, "We've watched this Prisoner episode. It's Dance of the Dead. It wasn't very good."
Really?
And then I didn't then watch it at that point, so I never saw it until I got the DVD box set as a student, I think. And I don't really get this episode at all.
Interesting. Right. Okay.
And I had a long day yesterday, and I rewatched it last night, and I was almost falling asleep.
Mm.
And I don't think that's necessarily the problem with the episode. I think that was the fact that I was tired, but it wasn't holding my attention. So, so I'm gonna hold fire on any criticism I might have, because I'm hoping that through both of you having watched this, and you, Rob, in particular, having chosen it as an episode to talk about, that you can help turn me round and help me figure out what's going on, so that next time I watch it, I can enjoy it more than I did this time. So, Michael, your first impressions first, and then we'll throw it over to Rob, who can tell us why it's such a good episode.
I have made notes. I've made extensive, proper notes using pens and everything. Okay. Admittedly, at its top it says, "Frankly baffling." Okay.
That's the whole show.
Which is, yeah. To be fair, you're right. You're not wrong on that one. I think it's one of, although, yes, you're right. There are times when it's just a bit slow. You want to, it's like, for God's sake, walk faster towards the cave, right? That's in your head, but it's also one of the most quotable episodes of The Prisoner. It's got some cracking lines. There's some stuff that's repeated from other episodes as like kind of ongoing themes, but it's got some great little sections and some brilliantly unnerving performances going on.
Yeah, I'd agree.
It's just where it lost me was those last 5 minutes, because I was with it. I was kind of right. The plot needed to get him to have a radio, and they'd thought they'd do the whole Operation Mincemeat Albert RN storyline with the body, but then the body's actually in the morgue, and he manages to sneak in. The bit where the town hall rejects him, like a TARDIS going, "Nope, not coming in here," or what, and that was not got into. But there's a lot of stuff in The Prisoner not got into. You're kind of just here for the ride. It's fine.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of kind of stuff like that, like him saying, "Oh, I don't sleep anymore," and it was like the battle for sleep, and then you're like, well, that's not really been gone into either. There's a lot of stuff that you've seen elsewhere in other episodes, which you may not have seen in the production order at this point, but like the big hypnotic light when he's having a lie down and decides to sleep in the chair instead of the bed, and they keep bringing him cocoa at night, and it's like, do you not think it's drugged? But that's kind of, so there's a lot of themes. So if you were going to introduce The Prisoner to someone, it's actually not a bad place to start, because other episodes are better, build on similar themes, and that's fine. You've got your classic mad scientist without any morals. You've got the links back to the spy business with Dutton. You've got him trying to make friends. They've also got him trying to give him a relationship so that they can kind of weaken him in some way to have something. So there's a lot of recurring themes here, but I just don't think they knew how to finish it, because there's a whole thing with him being potentially unmutual, where they find him guilty of crimes that he doesn't know what the crimes are, which is fine if you're in like a Franz Kafka novel with like The Trial, where it's like, I'm accusing you of something and you know what you've done, I don't really know what I've done. Yeah, well, that's what you would say, isn't it? As a recurring thing. But it's the prisoner.
Yeah.
And he's a spy. And they're going, you've broken the rules. And he's like, I don't actually care about your rules, which is a different take on the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then the sentence is death, or the sentence is being chased like a bit from Benny Hill while you're in a Jean Cocteau film. Looks gorgeous. I mean, don't get me wrong. You're totally right. The way it's been shot, beautiful, right? The nods to other films, really nice. Even the pedestrian stuff, that's like he's in a room, he's doing a bit of investigating, equally beautifully shot, especially on the Blu-ray. It looks great. But we sentence you to death, let's chase you down a corridor, you end up in a room with a teleprompter. Is that meant to be number one behind a screen or not? Oh, it's a machine, I'll smash it. Oh, it's not broken. and
Yeah.
What? It's like it's the IT repairman thing, and you're like, what? What's and then it just goes, oh, we've fulfilled our 50-minute contract. Here's the end. And I was sat there going, no, I've missed something. I have, and I'm going through all of the notes and everything. So help me,
Rob. Tell us how that all plays out for you and why you like it.
Well, I don't know whether to start in reverse order here, because you do know the ending wasn't actually filmed. The proper ending wasn't filmed.
No, tell us,
right.
please.
Okay, tell us what the proper ending would have been.
Well, I don't know if it makes any more sense. Anyway,
go for it.
What happened was, you get to that bit where number 2 starts laughing at him, and he says, he picks up a glass ashtray and smashes the teleprompter, and he says to the Bo Peep girl, "Shall we dance?" And they go back into the dance hall where everyone's spinning around in a huge circle. The circle parts, and they join the circle, and they keep dancing, and they keep dancing. It gets faster and faster and faster. And it doesn't make any more sense than the ending we eventually had. But the thing with Dance of the Dead, and it's why I like it. There's lots of reasons why I like it, but for me, I love to know the sources of things. And that, for example, the sequence I've just described was lifted from a film called The Devil and Daniel Webster, made in 1941. It's sort of a Faustian thing, the devil.
Oh yeah, I've seen it. It's brilliant.
Yeah, but the thing is, but it's got the similar kind of motifs of like the jury includes characters from American history, like Benedict Arnold, who, well, we all know who he was, and Steele Barnett, who was a pirate, and the judge of all people was the judge who presided over the Salem witch trials. But it's the same kind of setup. It's the same kind of setup as that, isn't it?
Like, that makes a lot more sense, because I was wondering about
the big carnival dance. I mean, I don't know what Skene was up to, whether because his famous quote is when he was commissioned to do this, he said, "I saw not a single piece of paper. They sat there waiting for an approach, an attitude, anything. So I just did what I wanted." So, which explains why, yes, number 1 is a telex machine, because everyone was going, well, who is number 1? We don't know. If you want to make it a telex machine, fine. It could be something else next week,
No, it's ideal because it's the getting information from number 1. It's just a communications device.
Yeah. But so that is completely lifted, and he was quite honest about this. And you mentioned John Cocteau, and Skene said, yes, I was actually very much in love with John Cocteau's world, and so there's lists from Orpheus, it was in 1951 film. And if you think about it, obviously Orpheus goes into the underworld where everyone's dead. And in Dance of the Dead, the prisoner episode, all the villagers are symbolically dead, aren't they? And that's what they try to get him to. That's what they try to get him to admit to in this: the fact that he doesn't exist outside the village, because they doctor the bloke's body, and he said, and number 2 says, well, to all intents and purposes, the world thinks you're dead.
Yeah,
and that theme continues in Many Happy Returns as well, because when he, basically the village doesn't function when he's out of it, but when he goes back, it does function. I love Skene scripts. I mean, if you read them written down, they're beautiful. They're like short stories. The use of prose and everything. But it was very much his preoccupation in this one, Many Happy Returns, and A, B, and C, and also that the village wasn't a real place. It was some kind of dream that had trapped him somewhere between sort of life and death, because there's a scene that's cut from Many Happy Returns where, the bit where he wakes up in the back of the truck driving through London.
Hmm.
He looks out and he's still in the village and he's being chased by a village taxi. Then he jumps out of the truck and he's back in London again. So it's got that whole idea that, where actually was he? Was he actually dreaming all this?
Right.
So that's, I think that's the big sort of driving thing, is that you don't exist outside the village, and that is kind of a number two, particularly in this story, because she doesn't, she's not as aggressive as some of the male number two. She's not as authoritarian. She's just trying to manipulate him into sort of do it that way and say, well, look, you might as well join us because there's nothing for you out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like the bit where
she wants to persuade rather than She literally does want to win him over.
Yeah. But in a very elliptical kind of what's the word? I mean, you mentioned. I mean, the dialogue is just like, talk about Dance of the Dead. I mean, this is Dance of the Dialogue. I mean, that wonderful scene on the beach when they're just sort of batting things back and forward.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is not an ITC action series. I'm sorry. We've gone completely over into existential fantasy and sort of like.
Yeah. I just have to say, watching it, there were various bits that seemed very familiar because they're on the soundtrack album that was released in the early 2000s. There's the scene. There is that scene on the beach. I like my dream. Well, then you are mad.
I like my dream. You'll be taken for mad. You are mad.
Yeah, and then there's the one with his watcher on the when they're up at the flagpole
on the parapet thing.
Yeah, and there's the whole like you have no values. I have different values. I wouldn't be a goldfish in a bowl. So those scenes. Yeah. In terms of the audio are very familiar, but because I haven't watched the episode that many times, watching it, you're like, oh yeah, this is the context of that piece of dialogue, And I agree. I think Mary Morris is great. I love her as number two because she's just a bit weird, and clearly like has a very clear idea of what she's doing.
She's a lot more in charge than a lot of the other number twos.
Yeah.
But she seems very quietly confident, and she has no doubt that in the end the village will win. That's a very sinister kind of undercurrent.
She's more of the opinion that the village has already won. Everyone just needs to realise that it's won.
It'll just take time. It'll just take time, which is like there's a brilliant.
Sorry, I just need to do. When it says, "Oh, yeah, we're very democratic in some ways."
Yeah.
Now, just for anyone listening to this next year, when I God hope that the world is a better place, we're in the UK. We have an unelected, brand new member of state head. We've got the Prime Minister was voted by 0.04% of the entire population of the UK, and we're in a hell of a state at the moment. But we still bang on about how democratic we are. And it's like, you what? So we feel more like the village because of that line. I just sat there watching it this morning going, oh, God, yeah. So it's like, we are Democrat. And then he goes, oh, it's not very English, is it? He goes, are you English? And it's like, yeah.
Well, there's a rider to that. Because they have three judges. And he goes, just like the French Revolution. And number two says, yes, but they got through the deadwood, didn't they?
Yeah. Yes. It's that moment where you're like, okay, so...
you've been stitched up, mate,
Well, it's that sense of like, he's offering that as a criticism.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's like, well, you don't want to be compared to the French Revolution, do you? And she just takes it and goes, no, that's fine,
It's absolutely fine, yeah.
It's that thing of
very parallel to recent politicians in there, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like the Doctor. His final performance, he actually died several months before the episode was shown.
Right.
But the whole thing of like I like that the way that it opens with him. He's trying to use the sort of traditional breaking people methods of the village, and number two comes in and says, no, this is not what we're about. And there's the whole thing of like, Dutton is expendable, but number 6 is not, and it's sort of reiterating the importance of number 6 to the village in a way that we're not quite sure why. I guess we should talk about orders here. So we're doing this as episode 8. We're following the order on the Blu-ray, but there are other orders of stuff, and there's some very clear dialogue. Several times he says, "I'm new here." And I know that there are various orders of watching, and one of them suggests that you should watch Dance of the Dead maybe second or third when you're watching The Prisoner. How do you feel that it fits into the show in that regard, Rob?
Well, I can refer here. It was one. Well, as is obvious from the Portmeirion filming, it was one of the first. It was one of the original 5, which was filmed at Portmeirion on the 23rd, 26th, and 27th of September '66.
I think Alex Cox has got it 4th.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say 4th. And you're quite right, and it's also, if you think about the way those early episodes are all structured, they're all structured around a village event, or episode 1 structured around the village, Free for All structured around the election, this one structured around the carnival, and then the Checkmate is the human chess game. So if you think of it like that, they were all a bit too similar to sort of put together. If you think, I suppose that's making the most of the location, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the order thing with The Prisoner. I mean, it comes from, it's an ITC show, but it almost demands an order because there's a beginning and there's an ending. So where does everything else fit? But I mean, like from what Anthony Skeens said, he said, well, he wasn't told. He's just to go around and do what he wants. So, I mean, I'm very much of the thing that does it matter? Well, it's to some people, because I think people, particularly the way modern television works, there is an order to things. How episode, particularly more so now, the kind of idea of the episodic standalone episode show is pretty much gone, isn't it? Most things have an internal narrative now that continues. And The Prisoner's interesting.
That's exactly what I've fallen for. I've gone, right, narrative-wise, my brain is desperately trying to fit everything together and make it all sense. That's why this episode, the ending, felt so hollow, was because the promise of the earlier bits and the fact that I wanted to fit into a bigger narrative that I need on some stupid level to make sense is the reason that I didn't, well, not like it, because like I said, it's a cracking episode. It's just the ending made me go, you what? And the reason I did that is because I'm trying to cram it into, is he a spy? Is he the person who's trying to... And you know what? That's not what it's about. I just fight that constantly. What it is about being bloody minded enough to keep control of yourself at the cost of friends, lives, the way of life, everything. Because he could be happy in the village. Well, other people could be happy in the village. I was actually sat at work thinking I probably would be all right in the village, actually.
The thing
which isn't good.
I think it's interesting. I think the reason, perhaps the reason, one of the reasons The Prisoner was seen as so confusing at the time and maybe dismissed was because of this very reason. The fact that the internal narrative is so all over the shop, I mean, this is where, this is where fandom comes in, so again, in The Prisoner's Dilemma, the rather cheeky idea was that whenever they'd done something to him and it hadn't worked, they'd basically wipe his memory. So he felt he was like waking up for the first time. No,
that does make sense. And that also allows him to go, I'm new here.
Yeah.
So basically,
and obviously explicitly, that is technology that is revealed in Do Not Forsake Me.
Yes, it is. And if you think about it, because every story rewinds to the beginning when he resigns, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So, which I thought was like rather delightful, that idea.
Though I suppose there's something interesting, just thinking about what you were saying earlier about this episode being about death. Symbolic death, and about the idea that, like, he's dead outside. If the order that we are following, the Blu-ray order, this comes immediately after Many Happy Returns, and it comes before Checkmate. So actually, there is a sort of thematic thing going on there in that he's escaped in the previous episode and been returned to the village, and it's almost like
explain why he's pissed off.
Yeah, and it's this kind of thing of like, well, you thought you could escape, but you can't. You can never escape the village. And then obviously, Checkmate immediately following this is another one of his very clear escape attempt episodes.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think maybe there's an element that of it works in that sequence.
Well, I think. I mean, particularly Dance of the Dead and Many Happy Returns. The inclusion of number two's black cat. I think that if you, for example, if you see Dance of the Dead before Many Happy Returns, which also has the black cat, the significance of that is much more. Oh, well, that's number two's cat, and it's number two's cat still watching it. Number two's cat's waiting for. Well, if you've seen Many Happy Returns first, you don't know it's number two's cat. So I think particularly Skene had his own little internal logic as far as he was.
That makes loads of sense.
He was writing.
Yeah. So in my notes I've actually got written, the cat works at the village. Number two says that, and you're like, what? And then he says something sexist about trusting women. But also, you've got, it is because I had, when I was watching this, I'd not put the cat and number two together because obviously I'd not thought of it. And I was thinking, is the cat symbolic of number 6 himself? Because, it's that whole cat walks by himself thing.
Alone, yeah.
Because he's not a dog. He's not loyal to his masters. He's a cat. And, he's all right. He's slinky and he's attractive the way, because that's why he got the job. So he is more cat-like than dog-like. But then again, the cat works for number 2. So the cat actually was more important than I even give it any credit for. But like you said, when you see Many Happy Returns, you just go, yeah, it's a cat. There's a cat, and it's the only thing not working. So yeah, unless, quite obviously, and this is quite boring, the writer had a cat and just liked them round and just thought.
But it's also But this is the other thing that two female number 2s, and they've both got black cats, and they're black cats of which is familiars. So I don't know if that was another little illusion, perhaps.
Does number 2 being Peter Pan make the village Never Neverland? I mean, there's a whole extra level of because there's a whole thing about the war against sleep because he says he's not had proper sleep, and I was just thinking because is it a dream world? Because it's very the surreal and the dream world thing going on. So, but then you've got the thing about being Jack the Ripper and then turning it into Peter Pan late on in the drafts.
I think the Peter Pan thing fits more. It fits more.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the Jack the Ripper is a bit graphic and a bit nasty.
Yeah, and it's not an identifiable costume either.
But did you know that Mary Morris played Peter Pan on stage?
No.
So I can see that she fits the part.
So here we are. That can't be a coincidence, can it? I mean, here's the prisoner again being wonderfully self-aware, putting one of its guest stars into a costume she played when she was. Let me see, what year was it? 46, I think, something like that. 46, yes. So that's got to be intentional, hasn't it? But again, I think there's a bit of the Alice in Wonderland thing where he's in the town hall, he uses a key to unlock the door, and the trial thing, as well as being very Kafkaesque, I think, is also like the trial at the end of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, where she meets all these people in the story she's met before, which is what happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's I think Skene unashamedly pilfering here and putting it all together, but I don't know, it just really works for me.
To be fair, we're Doctor Who fans, so we're quite used to stuff being lifted from elsewhere and presented, reheated and given back to us, and us being grateful.
So I suppose maybe that's perhaps why I haven't connected with this episode as much, because I'm maybe not as familiar with the various sources that you guys have talked about. And so I haven't been kind of spotting them. I've just been kind of going, this feels a little bit disjointed, and what's going on here? And
that thing about the Faustian thing that you mentioned earlier, that just reminded me of the Matter of Life and Death trial as well. With the characters from history turning up.
I made a note of that when I was watching it again, because it's the same. Yes, very much so.
So and that's just such a great movie. Right. Like I always said, we should have a podcast where we just bring stuff to the table the other person hasn't seen and just go, let's discuss this. just to introduce things to the outside world that we're passionate about, that no other bugger's heard of. So,
there's even sorry to interrupt.
No, you go for it. You're the guest.
There's even German expressionism in there, because this is from the script. He goes into that long room of filing cabinets at the town hall. Skene writes, "This is a German horror of a long, narrow room with filing cabinets on either side from floor to ceiling. At the far end, no longer than a postage stamp from where he stands, is a locked door."
Well, that's straight from Alice as well as Dr. Caligari. Yeah.
That's. I think maybe this episode, because we're if you'd agree, I don't know, but I think we're a much more media literate culture now, and I think maybe this episode would stand up better if you showed it to people who had more of an awareness of like sources being used for different things and so on. Maybe at the time, people were just going, bloody hell, I thought this was supposed to be about a secret agent,
Yes.
But then again, you've also got Bo Peep, which gives us that wonderful line, "Who always knows where to find."
Yeah, because she's one of the observers, but she's being observed by number 6. So it's a who watches the Watchmen thing going on. So yeah.
But I do love the imagery thing. The terrifying bit for me is like, when Dutton says, doesn't he, I'll be going back to the hospital and that'll be it. I'll cease to exist or something. Yeah. And then he asks for a character witness and they bring out the guy dressed as a fool or a jester, And that's terrifying. That's one of the most frightening images in The Prisoner, I think.
Yes, I thought the whole Dutton thing was quite effective.
He's a terrific actor, that guy. He wasn't particularly famous, but he's so brilliant in that part.
Yeah.
The termination order's really good as well. It's just his name on black. That's it. There's no dates, there's no commands, there's nothing. It's just a lot of...
It's the only time a name appears in village documentation, and it's a kill order. So think about that.
Because he doesn't have a number, does he? Dutton is never referred to by a number. He's always Dutton.
Well, that's it. And also, it's that, if you think about the order thing, it's another motif from the Arrival, isn't it? Because he meets someone he knows, and in Arrival he meets Cobb, and in this one he meets Dutton. Trying to. What about the other two? I'm trying to think. No, he doesn't meet anyone in Freefall he's known before, does he? Or Checkmate, I don't think. No, so if you watch those 4 in order, it's surprising how many similar kind of sort of setups there are. Which I think, and also if they wanted to, you run out of money, you've got to do mock-ups at Boreham Wood. I know, we'll put the couple of episodes with the Pulp Mirren stuff back down here, so we can space them out. It might have been as simple as that. We'll never know,
Yeah.
I've got a couple of boring questions. Why doesn't Rover attack him when he's on the beach having a stroll? It's almost as if he's found Rover doing something questionable on the beach and Rover's just like, oh, I wasn't here. And it kind of bounces off. Or did I just not...
Well, number 2 says, and will eventually go back to his room. It's the only place he can ever go. And maybe that's why they call Rover.
Yeah, and there's no orange alert called, though, so...
On the other hand, this is an exceptionally beautiful shot, isn't it? So with him and him on the beach, kneeling on the beach, almost like, oh, I've had enough,
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting sequence with the whole, he can't get out of the door, and then he very swiftly gets out the window. You think, well, why do they bother locking the door if they're not going to lock the window? And then there is the follow up of like, well, he'll just get bored. Like there is nowhere for him to go. He will always Rover will always catch him.
Sorry, I've just remembered the gardener who's just randomly planting window box stuff.
I don't want any flowers. Well,
I don't want it. Everyone has flowers. It's a carnival, and every time they say carnival, my brain keeps going carnival, and it's like go back to the Star Trek episode, and it's like Happy Carnival, which was I think made a year before. Where they do that thing where everyone... Oh, it's like The Purge, only not breaching somebody's copyright. And well, it's the same plot. for one night a year, everybody goes, mental, and there's no laws, and they all go mad, and then everything goes back to normal.
Is it when they're all dressed in 1930s clothes and stuff? It's for no apparent reason.
The whole body thing, that feels like it comes out of nowhere. In that he falls asleep on the beach and then he wakes up, and there's the body. Like, have they planted that body there for him to find?
Well, I thought so, but there was one line when it wasn't. Hang on, then there's an implication in one line where they do it the other way around. They say, "Oh, we also can seize opportunities," like the body.
Yeah, possibly. We've amended him slightly. That's right.
Yeah,
it's really creepy stuff,
I don't know. Don't know. Was it? Yeah.
One thing we haven't touched on. I think it's quite again, which I think makes this more modern or reactionary, or maybe both, is the fact that this is in this episode, nearly all the opponents to him are female. All the people in senior positions, and that's interesting because obviously number 2 was meant to be a male actor, but they changed it. And did they change it because they thought, well, hang on, there's all these others lined up in this episode? The 2 maids, one flirts with him, one tries to sort of mother him, and he rejects both of them. So if you look at it now, I mean, in Kafka, the female characters are often try to trap the protagonist and lure them aside and whatever, so that's got a commonality with that. But I wonder what you guys think. Does it, because he's resisting all these women, or all the women are the opposition, does that make this a modern episode, or quite a bit misogynistic?
I mean, we've talked about this, or we will talk about this when we get to Many Happy Returns. Not Many Happy Returns. Sorry, other one where he escapes the village. Do not forsake me, my darling. And it's the whole thing of like, well, there wasn't really any plan, and that episode really isn't. It hasn't got McGowan's fingerprints on it because he's not in it.
Yes.
But at the same time, it gives a reason for why he isn't interested in any of the women in the village.
So he's got a fiance.
Because he's got a fiance outside, and it then makes sense. You can kind of then go. You can look back through it and go, okay, this is why he's not getting involved with any of these women, because he's being faithful to his fiance. You also have the fact that McGowan didn't feel that kind of stuff was appropriate for television. He was quite prepared to kind of
beat people up.
He was quite prepared to do sexiness if it was for the cinema, but as far as TV went, he was like, no, this needs to be.
I wonder if that would be different if he'd realised how much this specific thing would be his legacy, because the movies he's done, all right, a handful of them are absolute classics. I'm not going to count the Clint Eastwood thing, because that was made after The Prisoner, and he's basically playing a number 2 to Clint Eastwood's number 6 for Escape from Alcatraz. But the other stuff that he's made, like Ice Station Zebra and all that business, you're like, yeah, they're decent performances and there's some good stuff there, but this is the thing that, for us, we know him for forever, because the Prisoner's just going to be there, and it was his masterpiece.
Yeah.
I can't see why you wouldn't throw yourself wholeheartedly into it. So I think the argument for the relationship business in this thing, him not wanting to do it because it's telly, it might not be the whole story, because I'm thinking it's more he doesn't want to do it because he's created this character that's arguably an extension of himself.
I mean, I think, again,
I don't know.
Sorry, particularly in this episode, it strikes me as modern, because if you think about it, at the time when it was made, a lot of women actresses were in secondary roles, and there's a very prominent female actors in this one.
Yeah.
But also, Skene himself was very interested in strong female characters. I mean, there's the female number 2 in Many Happy Returns, the scientist in A, B, and C, and Engadine. And in 1970, he wrote a series of plays about 19th century female criminals. So it was obviously something that he was interested in doing.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, for me, it's an interesting question. This is why maybe The Prisoner doesn't look as dainted as The Saint, or where Sir Roger snobbing everything in sight, because it's just like, it doesn't, as you say, he's not interested, is he? I mean, he gets kind of, although number two says in chimes, oh, such an obvious weakness in you, when he's getting kind of drawn into Nadia's situation.
Yeah.
But I think that's more empathy. I don't think he's
Yeah.
not sexually attracted to her, is he?
No.
It's fascinating. I think, and that kind of quality, particularly to the fore in this episode, I think gives the prisoner some of its modernity and what's the word? Longevity.
It's, I suppose that because we've done UFO before this, one of our guests, Stephen, who's been on the podcast with us twice for the prisoner, tried to watch UFO, and he couldn't get past the sort of the misogyny and the leeriness of the first episode, which is a shame because the first episode of UFO is the worst offender as far as that goes.
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah. And although we love the show, it is one of the things about it that dates it very much. And I think you're right in saying that the prisoner, which I think taps into some similar things, not least because there was a crossover of production team towards the end of UFO with the prisoner. But it stands above UFO in that sense, that it doesn't feel as dated with regards to its sexual politics.
Yeah, I mean, at all. And also, I mean, quite a few other women and the women who are interested in the prisoner, most of them are they're not girls, are they? They're women, mature women, So that gives it a more. That's kind of raises it from sort of being well above salacious. Shall I say? If I can put it like that. Mm.
Yeah. Although not giving some of the characters names, things like Girl 1 and Girl 2 in the script kind of doesn't help, especially when they've actually got number badges. When they could just go number 56, and you'd go, that's fine.
Like Sonia. I mean, she has a wild old time with him. She's trying to blow him up and kill him and whatever. But I suppose that's a bit of a spy cliche, the killer babe.
Yeah,
I can put it like that.
Yeah.
But
that's more because I think there are two big reactions to the Bond films, and the first one would be this, where you just go, let's be cerebral, let's knock the leeriness on the head. But the other big reaction is your Ipcress file, where you've got more your John le Carré, dirty, nobody's got very exciting technology. I think the Michael Caine is the opposite to Bond aspect. So you've got Bond in the centre being this example of Britishness and the spy and all of that business with the great gadgets and everything. But then you've got, at the other end, then it goes to sort of almost your Simon Templar, and then it would go the Saint, and then beyond the Saint you've got the prisoner at the other end of the spectrum, and then right at the other far end you've got your Ipcress file version, which is very gritty, very real, very boring. There's a lot of sitting around in those. There's a lot of not much happening as you John le Carré end of things. So
I suppose the common thread there, isn't it, with if you've got something moral going on, you have cerebral fantasy, which is a prisoner over here, or you have realism over here, which is the Ipcress file or Callan.
Callan, especially.
Callan's tortured conscience, and it's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. And of course, George Markstein worked on both. He worked on the prisoner and Callan. So there is definitely, and you still have that thing in Callan where, well, I'm just a pawn, that people are playing chess quite a lot. So that's obviously a Markstein trope,
Can you imagine an episode of The Prisoner where they were playing war games with little lead soldiers? That would have just been so good.
Equally, I like to see David Callan and Lonely in the Village. I think that
yeah. There are other fictional spies we'd like to see in the village. That's a podcast on its own.
That was brilliant.
Right. So let's draw things to a close as we usually do, with Spot the Doctor Who actor. So we'll let Michael go first because Michael is notoriously bad at this. So hopefully the field will be left open for you, Michael. I'm going to tee you up. There are There are 3.
Oh God, 3.
One of whom has already appeared in Arrival, so we've covered her. But you can see if you spotted her again this time. But there were 2 others. There are 2 others in this episode. So,
right, okay, I'll put my hand on my heart because I don't cheat at this because that's the point. Yeah. If I was going to cheat, what's the point of playing? Right,
it's a pub quiz, isn't it? Don't cheat.
Yeah. So I thought that the guy who played the scientist must have been in Doctor Who. But then you've said halfway through this, he died short after this.
Yes.
So I'm thinking he's either in an early Hartnell or he's not here at all. I was thinking maybe Pops a Troughton, but that would be
He was not in Doctor Who.
Right. That was it. I was going to hedge my bets and go possibly.
So I'll narrow it down for you, Michael. We have one guest star who went on to be in Doctor Who in the 80s, and one who had been in Doctor Who the year before this, and whose co-star we have already seen in The Prisoner.
You've got me.
Okay.
You've got me. Okay.
Rob, we'll throw it open to you. Who did you spot from Doctor Who?
Right. Well, obviously, the lovely Mary Morris.
Yes.
'Cause she was in Kinder in 1982.
Was she the old lady in Kinder?
Yes.
She was the old lady in Kinder.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so cool. God. And I'd love to say she looked different, but she doesn't. One absolute idiot. Right.
You might have.
I love Kinder.
I think you've got me on the one who'd been in Doctor Who before this. I have to say. But
let me guess. It was one of the Sensorites.
No, it wasn't one of the Sensorites. You saw his face. Obviously, it was in black and white rather than colour. But
go on.
It wasn't Aubrey Morris, was it?
No, it wasn't Aubrey Morris. It was Alan White who played Dutton.
Oh, in 10th Planet.
He was
one of the astronauts.
He was one of the astronauts in 10th Planet. We've already seen, or will see, Earl Cameron.
That's why you said Earl Cameron, because you said you'd seen his partner.
Both of those doomed astronauts from the 10th Planet went on to appear in The Prisoner. The other one is Patsy Smart.
Yes. Talanta Wang Chiang. Yes.
Who's in Talanta Wang Chiang, who we've already seen in Arrival, so we've already covered her. And I wanted to give a shout out to Aubrey Morris anyway, because although he was never in Doctor Who, you feel he was one of those actors that should have been in Doctor Who.
He should have been, actually.
as the town crier / Caesar in the trial. You'll recognise him from Hitchhiker's Guide as the captain of the B-Ark.
And indeed, Clockwork Orange, Wicker Man.
Yeah. One's never alone with a rubber duck.
With a rubber duck, yes.
And by the way, did you know Denise Buckley, who plays the Daymaid in this, in Dance the Dead, was originally cast as Victoria Waterfield in Doctor Who?
I think I was aware that Debbie Watling was not the first choice, but I had.
She wasn't. She was cast. She was contracted, and something happened, and she was let go. And Deborah Watling became the immortal Victoria instead of her. So there you go.
A parallel universe there.
Would have been round this. I think she was probably too tall because Fraser and Patrick weren't very tall.
Yeah.
I'm having a Clockwork Orange moment. Yes, of course, and it's everything's fitting together now.
And the Wicker Man, of course, he was in the Wicker Man. So
yeah.
Oh, it's now. Actually. Oh, hang on, it's the solstice today. I've got an excuse to watch Wicker Man.
Oh yeah. Yes, we're recording this on the 23rd of September, so we're.
I mean, I love it. I think it's a great episode. I mean, it's nonsensical, it's strange, it's weird, but it's just brilliant, John Smith, the film editor, said Dance the Dead was a mixture of theatre, cinema, and fantasy. He said that's what The Prisoner was all about. And McGowan hated this episode as well. So I don't know why particularly, but it stayed on the shelf for a long time, and maybe that's another reason it appears so late in the running order. I don't know.
I mean, I have to say, I have enjoyed talking about it with you guys more than I did watching it this time. And hopefully next time, maybe I'll get something fresh out of it off the back of this conversation. But thank you so much for joining us, Rob.
It's all right. It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
I will say, well, if we could say goodbye to you, and then Michael will sign off, as he usually does, to finish us off. So thank you so much, Rob.
And goodbye from me, bye seeing you. As always, be seeing you.
And now for the spoilery bit.
So, it's kind of about, well, without putting too nice a point on it, bloody-mindedness. Just not giving in for the sake of not giving in.
Well, I suppose if you look at Fallout, they sort of finally work out, well, we're not going to beat this guy, so what should we do to try and get him on top? I know, we'll offer him the entire village, and we'll see if we can buy him off that way, which of course he then rejects, doesn't he? Um, um, yeah, I mean, the whole thing in Fallout with it, the number one's your dark side, whatever. I mean, he says it was seeded in right from the beginning. I don't know if it was because it seems to come. Does it come out of nowhere? Kind of does. I mean, now we could probably see that thread work through, but I don't know.
I mean, we've talked about this before on the show, but I was introduced to the show by my dad because he's old enough to have watched it as a kid in the 60s, and basically the way he introduced the show was with the spoiler of the ending. Like, he was like, it's this show about this guy, and one of the few things he told me about it was that number 6 is number 1. So I knew that from the off.
You need to watch it now, then.
And it's one of those things where I honestly don't know whether I would have seen that coming.
Interesting.
And until it happened, because I knew it was coming, So it's very difficult to then kind of look back. And there's so many things where I watch them and I like it, and then I read something or I listen to a podcast and somebody's kind of seen some subtext, and I'm like, no, I didn't spot that. So I think it's the kind of thing that would have kind of completely sideswiped me had I approached it kind of cold.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you know that interview with McGowan when he's talking about that, and he wrote the script and sort of gave it to David Tomlin, the producer, to read, and Tomlin went away and read it and gets to the last page, looks up and said, "I thought it might be you in the end."
Yeah. Well, then there's an interview with Lewis Greifer, I don't know how you pronounce his name, where he talks about he talks about having seen it coming. When McGowan told him, he was like, "Yeah, I knew that was where it was going." So
it makes sense, and if you think about contemporary things that are similar to The Prisoner, they do pull that trick, don't they? I'm trying to think of one, and I can't now, but I'm sure there have been things like that do that at the end. It's like, oh, it's the guy who's the main character, but I can't think of one off the top of my head right now.
That was the Tin Dog Podcast. Everything discussed is the intellectual property of others. No infringement is intended. For early access to reviews, follow the show on YouTube or Twitter @Tin Dog Podcast. To contact the show, email tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk. The Tin Dog Podcast is a founder member of the Doctor Who Podcast Alliance.